The first time I truly understood fear again was not in Fallujah, not in the blood-slick hallways I processed for the bureau, but on a quiet Tuesday night in May when my phone chimed at 11:12 p.m. And I saw Evelyn Whitaker's face glowing under my porch light, sliding a key into my front door as casually as if she were coming home from bridge club. I was 61 years old, retired, supposedly safe, and yet my heart slammed so hard against my ribs I tasted metal. I stood barefoot in the dark office in cotton pajama pants, watching a woman I barely knew try to cross the one line no one had crossed since the day I carried my wife over that threshold 29 years earlier. The rage that rolled through me was cold, surgical, and terrifyingly familiar. It was the same rage I used to feel when a suspect smirked at a grieving mother and said, "Prove it." I did not move. I did not shout. I simply watched the 4K feed as the deadbolt refused to turn, watched her shoulders stiffen, watched her look straight into the lens for one frozen heartbeat. And in that moment something ancient inside me woke up and stretched. This time the crime scene was my home, and the suspect had no idea the investigator was already inside the wire. My name is Richard Caldwell. Rich to anyone who has ever handed me coffee at 3 a.m. while we waited for the medical examiner. I spent 15 years with the Department of Justice walking into rooms where the air itself felt bruised. I have photographed children who would never come home, cataloged ligature marks on mothers who trusted the wrong man, carried evidence bags out of houses that still smelled like birthday cake. I thought those days were behind me when I turned in my badge, and we bought the house on Sycamore Court with the wide porch and the oak trees older than the county itself. And picked the neighborhood because the sidewalks were smooth enough for the grandkids to ride scooters without scraping knees. I picked it because the lots were big enough that I could breathe. We never imagined we were buying into a fiefdom ruled by a woman whose only qualification was 8 years of uninterrupted fear. The first encounter left me quietly furious. Evelyn Whitaker arrived in her pearl-white Mercedes on a Saturday morning that smelled of coffee and pine mulch. I was on my knees replacing sun-bleached fence pickets, enjoying the honest burn in my shoulders, when her heels announced her like gunshots on concrete. Navy blazer, clipboard, hair sprayed into submission, and in her right hand the brass house key that made my stomach drop the way it used to when I realized a scene had been staged. She did not say good morning. She said, "Your trees are in violation and I need inside now." I stood slowly, sawdust drifting from my gloves, and felt the old calm settle over me like body armor. The calm that used to come right before I stepped over a threshold and began the grim choreography of documenting someone else's worst day. "Happy to discuss anything you'd like, ma'am," I said, voice steady the way it had been the first time I testified in federal court. "But I'll need written notice in 72 hours, per the covenants." Her smile was thin and practiced. Section 12.4 grants immediate entry. I've run this community for 8 years. Everyone else understands the arrangement. There is no Section 12.4. I knew it the way I still know the smell of decomp through a closed door. I also knew I had changed every lock the day the moving trucks left. That key in her hand was a violation made solid, a piece of brass that said she believed she owned more than my lawn. She believed she owned my life. When her Mercedes pulled away, I walked inside on legs that felt strangely light, the way they used to after I finished processing a scene and knew the evidence would hold, and was in the kitchen slicing tomatoes for lunch. She looked up and saw my face. "Rich, it started," I said, and the words tasted like the beginning of a very long case. That afternoon I did what I had done 1,000 times before. I built a file. 16 4K cameras went active, cloud backups on 3 separate continents, a fireproof safe for physical copies, and a timeline that began at 10:47 a.m. the day Evelyn Whitaker first threatened to walk through my door uninvited. I labeled the master folder Whitaker, systematic abuse of authority, and felt the old hunger stir, the hunger to see a bully finally, undeniably, caught. I wish I could say it was only about protecting my property. The truth is uglier. After 15 years of watching people with clipboards and titles destroy lives because no one had the training or the stomach to document the truth, I felt something close to gratitude. Finally, a fight I was uniquely qualified to finish. The weeks that followed were a slow bleed of sleep. Every motion alert at 2:17 a.m. sent adrenaline surging the way my pager used to when they called me to a triple homicide. Every vague Facebook post about certain residents who refused to maintain standards felt like a suspect returning to the scene to see what we had missed. I woke often, stood at the office window in the dark, and watched moonlight slide across the lawn like a crime scene floodlight, waiting for headlights that might belong to her. Neighbors began approaching me the way witnesses used to approach me after a shooting. Eyes darting, voices low, hands trembling around coffee cups on my porch. Margaret O'Brien, 78 years old, retired court stenographer, brought oatmeal raisin cookies and cried, without meaning to when she told me Evelyn once let herself into her house while she was at the doctor and moved furniture to check for water damage. Carlos Rivera stood in my driveway with his 6-year-old clinging to his leg and admitted the fines started the month his wife began chemotherapy. Each story cracked something open inside me, a slow, molten fury that decent people had been terrorized in their own homes by a woman whose only weapon was fear and the cowardice of everyone who looked away. Then came the night I will carry for the rest of my life. 11:12 p.m. The motion alert chimed like a gunshot. I was already awake. I had been for hours, sitting in the dark with a cup of coffee gone cold, listening to the house breathe. Camera 3 showed Evelyn on my porch, streetlight painting her face the color of old bone. She slid the key in, twisted, met resistance, twisted harder. The deadbolt held. She looked straight into the lens then, and for one heartbeat across the dark our eyes locked. I felt it like a physical blow, triumph, rage, and something colder, recognition that this had just crossed from civil harassment into documented felony trespass. I stood in my office in bare feet and pajama pants, heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, and I smiled. Not the polite smile I give cashiers. The smile I used to give defense attorneys right before I handed the prosecutor photographs they could never unsee. This time the evidence was gift-wrapped and breathing. I did not sleep again that night. I sat at my desk until dawn, exporting footage, verifying metadata, writing notes in the timeline with a hand that did not shake. When the sun came up, I looked like hell and felt like God. The conference in D.C. was the bait I never admitted, even to myself, that I was laying. I told the neighborhood I would be gone Wednesday through Friday. I left the house dark and empty on purpose, every camera on, every motion sensor hot. I kissed in goodbye with a calmness I did not feel and drove away knowing I had just turned my home into the perfect trap. Thursday morning at 9:32 a.m. My phone became a strobe light of alerts. I was standing in the Marriott Marquis Ballroom, surrounded by strangers discussing advances in blood spatter analysis when I opened the live feed and saw Evelyn's Mercedes parked in front of my house, like she had already won. I watched her sit in the driver's seat for 4 full minutes, talking on the phone with gestures sharp enough to cut glass. I watched her step out and dial 911. I watched 2 patrol cars and a fire truck roll up my quiet street, while my heart tried to punch its way out of my chest. And then I watched Sergeant Tom Harlan, 22 years on the job, built like a high school linebacker gone slightly to seed, take the brass key from her hand, turn it over once, and hand it back with a look that stripped paint. When Tom called me himself, his voice was calm but vibrating with the weary anger of a good cop who hates being used as a crowbar. I felt something inside me unclench for the first time in weeks. Relief, yes. But more than that, vindication. The system I had served my entire adult life, the system that had taken pieces of my soul on bloody floors and in autopsy rooms, still worked when someone fed it the truth in the right order. I spent the rest of the conference in a quiet corner of the lobby building what would become an 83-page evidence package. Synchronized multi-angle video, the 911 recording in which Evelyn claimed possible explosives or a meth lab, witness statements from 5 separate residents about prior unauthorized entries, county-filed covenants with the relevant sections highlighted in yellow, and every Virginia statute she had violated printed in 12-point font and tabbed for easy reference. I delivered 3 ring binders and a thumb drive to Tom and Detective Laura Chun on Monday morning. Laura flipped through the color-coded tabs, looked up, and said the words I had waited my entire life to hear from the other side of the table. Rich, this is the cleanest civilian package I've ever seen. We're not investigating whether a crime occurred. We're investigating how fast we can put handcuffs on her. A warrant for Evelyn Whitaker's arrest, false report to emergency services, Class 1 misdemeanor, was signed Wednesday afternoon. They took her into custody the following Thursday at 3 p.m. on her own manicured front lawn. Half the cul-de-sac watched as Tom Harlan read her rights and placed her in the back of his cruiser. She kept repeating, "Do you know who I am? I'm the HOA president," as though the title could stop stainless steel handcuffs from ratcheting shut. I was at the grocery store buying milk because I could not bear to watch a human being, even her, broken in public. My phone buzzed with texts from neighbors. They're at her house. Handcuffs. The whole street is watching. She's crying. I paid for the milk with hands that shook so badly the cashier asked if I was all right. 2 days later, Tom and his partner pulled into my driveway in full uniform. They stepped out, came to attention on the warm asphalt, and rendered a crisp military salute none of us had earned together, but all of us understood. Tom's eyes were wet when he dropped it. "On behalf of a lot of us who served," he said, voice rough, "thank you for trusting the system enough to make it work." I returned the salute with a hand that did not shake, but inside I was coming apart in the best possible way. Every year of lost sleep, every nightmare I could not explain to, and every time I questioned whether anything I ever did made a difference, it all poured out of me in that single, silent moment on my driveway, while neighbors watched from behind curtains and understood, maybe for the first time, what real power looks like when it is finally held accountable. The fallout was swift and merciless. The board stripped her of power that same week. Families who had suffered in silence for years stepped forward with stories that broke my heart and hardened my resolve in equal measure. The HOA's insurance carrier wrote a check for $85,000 before my attorney even finished the demand letter. Evelyn paid another $30,000 from her own accounts, signed a 5-year no-contact order, and 6 weeks later a for sale sign went up in her yard. She moved to West Texas. I hear she never says the name Virginia anymore. The new board rewrote every rule she had twisted. They hired professionals instead of tyrants. They dismissed every fine she had ever issued without cause. On warm evenings, now the street fills with kids on bikes and the sound of laughter that used to feel dangerous. Last Saturday, I was on my knees again, planting knockout roses along the fence I finished on my own terms. A young Marine captain and his wife stopped their car, got out, and walked over. He saluted before he shook my hand. "Sir, we just closed on the house 2 doors down. My family feels safer knowing you're here." I laughed and told him I just kept good records. But when I walked back to the porch with dirt under my fingernails and the smell of turned earth in the air, I understood something that settled into my bones like truth. Sometimes the most patriotic thing an old crime scene investigator can do is refuse to let one more bully believe a clipboard and a fake smile make her God. The cameras are still up. They always will be. But these days they record children chasing fireflies and neighbors waving from porches where nobody is afraid anymore. Justice, when it is thorough, patient, and documented down to the last timestamp, leaves a neighborhood-shaped scar that heals cleaner and stronger than it was before it was wounded. I would love to hear your story below. When did you finally say enough? What did it cost you in sleep, in peace, in pieces of your soul? And what did it give you back? Where do you personally draw your line in the sand when someone with a little power decides your home, your family, your life is theirs to control? There is no judgment here, only the shared knowledge that some fights are worth every sleepless night and every heartbeat that felt like it might stop. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I still read every single one. See you down there, friends.